In this week's pod, we were joined by Karen Ball to discuss why management matters. Karen is a senior fellow at ProSci and the author of ProSci's latest publication, The ADKAR Advantage, Your New Lens for Successful Change in 2024. Previously, she was the executive vice president of ProSci's research, product, and marketing team, and in addition to her role as an executive instructor, she continues to develop ProSci offerings and engage with clients as a change advisor. I just realized I read your bits as well, Martin. Sorry. But what are your takeaways? What are your takeaways from today? I think you're pretty impressed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could really see her passion for the industry. She's very much focused on the people side of change management, which is often why projects fail. So, yeah, fantastic. I loved her statements about being an end user advocate and some interesting insights around how technology may or may not help. How about you? What were your main takeaways from that?
Yeah, I love the fact that they built their own engine on their own research and that they continue to kind of push the envelope. They've just released a new kind of addendum to the ADKAR principles, which I also think are fantastic. And just having some insight with someone who's passionate about the industry from a change perspective, it's a fresh kind of view for us. It's a new guest, and I really like their energy. You can tell she loves change management and people for that matter. So this is a good one, folks. So sit back, relax, and as usual, enjoy. Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's good to have you with us, and it's been an amazing, intensive week for Project Chatter. We had our first live event in Edinburgh this week with the PMO conference. I won't go into details, but Dale is an apology today. But we do have Mr. Machine Gun Martin. How are you, Martin?
Yeah, very good. What's it like being back in the UK? You gonna move back permanently now?
It's Karen and I were just talking about it's absolutely lovely, and Edinburgh is absolutely lovely, and it was a beautiful day today, so we got to just hang around Old Town and be old souls and take our time for once, which is always a good thing to do.
And I think
So I don't know if I'll stay, but
I saw a
yeah.
photo that I'm still slightly traumatized by of you and Dale in kilts. How was that?
I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to give it away. I think there'll be some details coming out from House of PMO, so keep an eye out. But let's welcome our guest and a first-time guest, but not necessarily. Karen from ProSci, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Now, we had a great chat, and we have to thank your cohort and colleague, Mr. Tim Creasy, who's been on the episode a few times, 81 and 113, as you said, Karen. And we get along with him so well because a lot of what we talk about is around innovation and change management in projects. But it's more than just words, right? It's actually embody the process. How do you actually get people to adopt? So it's good to have a different perspective for once. So Tim can take a seat back and we can talk about your perspectives. But Karen, I always ask this for new guests. How did you get into this line of work? Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, I love that question, Val, because I ask it as well. And change management seems to be one of those disciplines that people find their way to it, and the path to it is varied, right? People come from the project
Mm.
side, people come from HR or training leadership. For myself, I was working in the information technology space, so I had almost 20 years of working in information management, information compliance, highly regulated industries, working on the vendor side, working with a systems integrator. And I found myself in the last chapter of the time I was actually dedicated to doing IT strategy was just seeing so many organizations investing, multi-millions of dollars in technologies that were designed to drive them towards their information management or information compliance goals. And at the desktop, there were people just sitting there wondering about why things were happening and the adoption stories and the proficiency stories. And then naturally, the benefits stories were oftentimes pretty poor. And I just wondered about what was the missing piece? Where was the link between what organizations were trying to do on the technology side and the people who were impacted by those technologies having such a miserable time? And I started doing research. I found myself in a space of learning about the people side of change. I always called myself an end user advocate because I didn't really know what I was. I just knew that I cared a lot about the people who were being asked to adopt the technologies. And oftentimes they were quite complex and, difficult to use. And that's another question, right? That's a design issue.
Mm.
And I think we've come a long way in that space. But I found the discipline of change management through that process. And then once I found the discipline of change management, it's not difficult to find ProSci. And so I just did the deep dive immersion in all of the content. I did get trained on multiple methodologies. So I was searching for a place to find something that was usable, applicable, model, you can apply, and ProSci fit all the check marks there. So yeah, I met Tim Creasy through that process, but I led a change management practice inside of the systems integration firm that I was working for. And we brought change management services right alongside the technology services. So as people were designing, developing, and delivering technology, we were coming along the side of those stories to get to the end user adoption and use. So it was really the complement to the work I was doing in IT, and I've been here now 18 years since then.
Wow. And it sounds like you still have the same level of passion for the job that you did when you
I
started.
I do. And it's one of those places that, we all, we find our places in different ways. And I've had the opportunity, having consulting and systems integration background, to work with lots of companies. That's one of the amazing opportunities when you're a consultant, is to find yourself in an oil and gas company one day and in a government entity the next day. And, you just learn so much about different industries and organizations and cultures. And, to me, the people side of it, I did a great project with Harley Davidson, and I got to wear Harley
Wow.
gear to work every day. And,
Yeah, that's cool.
just the fun that comes along with that. But the consistent factor, the common factor in all of those is the people. And, organizations talk about people being their most valuable asset. The question is, do they treat them that way? Do they treat them with the care that's needed to help them go through all the changes that are happening inside of organizations?
That's a good point. And I guess over the span of your career, have you seen an increase in the need or at least the demand for change management services?
I think a good question. I think the demand has always been there. I think what's larger now is the awareness of a formalized
Mm.
discipline that serves this need. And of course, change management, when you do the comparison of change management as a discipline and project management as a discipline, project management is further along. So if you look at the S curve of, the adoption of those capabilities, organizations are ahead in their project management capabilities and understanding the value of having the dedicated resources to lead and guide the changes that are happening. So I think change management is following. It's sitting behind a little bit on that S curve. But what is happening? More and more organizations are become aware that there's a formalized discipline in this space, just as I found it. Right? It was a finding of the discipline because of what I was searching for as a problem, a solution to the problem of adoption. So I think
Mm.
it's awareness increasing. I think there's more talk in all of the professional disciplines around change management. I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding of what it is. With my technical background, if you say change management, oftentimes people think of something different than the people side of change. They think of change control. Or in, when I was working in oil and gas and working in plant locations, they think of the control of change. So
Mhm.
it's like, oh, yes, we do change management. And my answer is, great, tell me about what you do. And oh, no, we do version control and we do check in, check out, and these are our finals. And I'm like, no, 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 no. That's the management of change. That's not change management, right? It's a completely, so we have to trigger into a conversation around, we're talking about the people who have to come alongside the changes to adopt them and to use them proficiently so that the organization can realize the benefits of the change. So yeah, so I think we're lagging, but the awareness, the data tells us, right, awareness is up tremendously from just a few years ago, and a lot of organizations are trying to figure out what it is and what to do with it and how to activate it.
So one of the big challenges in terms of people in the last few years has been the uptake in remote working, hybrid working, obviously during the pandemic. How has that in your view, affected the industry or affected how change management really works
Yeah,
on
Martin, that's a
projects?
great question. And ProSci does lots of research. I know Tim Creasy has shared with you all of our primary research, but we actually did a study during and post pandemic to talk about what have the change impacts been as a result of the pandemic. And of course, the natural change is the immediate work from home that everyone experienced, almost overnight. And what a significant change. And many organizations were scrambling to get people the right resources and the right tools, and to think about how you activate leadership structures, and how do you activate performance reviews, and all of the things that are the structures and mechanisms inside of our organizations. But I think the biggest aspect of that is all of the sudden change management as a person to person discipline. And I experience this in my projects. Boy, it's different to sit inside of a room with a group of people and to workshop a problem space on the adoption challenge that we might have for a feature set that's coming out in the next release. I mean, that's a specific problem we're trying to address, and we're whiteboarding, and we're, flipping off of, the conversations that are taking place in the room. And then being able to do that actual work sitting inside of these little squares on our screen with a camera pointing at us, and trying to keep people engaged in that process. So the process of developing our strategies and plans is different. And then, of course, the natural engagement with individuals impacted by change, because you're not sitting there next to them and saying, let's go through this together. Let's talk about this. Or they're people managers having a one-on-one coaching conversation. So it changed the dynamics, but it just changed how we do what we do, not what we do. So what we do is still important: sponsor engagement, people manager engagement, the way we help everybody go through their individual change journeys, which is documented and articulated in the ADKAR model. So it just added some extra challenges. But change management's not any different probably than a project manager trying to sit down and work with the project team and do your check-ins and your retrospectives, and everybody's a little square, and are they paying attention, and do they have the resources they need? So we just have to be more creative. But at the end of the day, it's nice now that we're back in person in many ways. I'm doing training, and to do in-person training, the experience is different.
Did you think it changed the frequency of communications? Because we all probably read the textbooks on change. It's all about communication. How did you think that pandemic, and maybe the present state, has the frequency in communication as well as the methods, has that
Yeah,
changed
I
in your
think
view?
we always talk about 5 to 7 times that it takes to hear or see something to be able to start locking it in and going, oh, I've heard that before. So some of the messaging might have to have been repeated differently. And I do think that we made the mistake of defaulting back to email messaging as a primary channel, when what we know to be true is that email is less than always effective. People don't open the messages, read the messages, consume them. So organizations were looking at platform options. I've seen a lot of clients stand up a communications channel inside of other platforms, whether it's their Slack or their Teams, or even SharePoint sites that people can go to. So there's both push and pull communications. So I talk to organizations about teaching your employees how to receive the messages that you're sending, right? How are you going to receive them, in what channel? What's a push, what's a pull, but what we have to think about, right, who's sending the messages, and all of those are part of change management. But I do think we had an opportunity to go to easy, which is back to email. And I think it just, again, people have to push into what's effective. And we can measure the effectiveness of our communication. Are people responding to some level of awareness about why a particular change is happening? And if we're sending awareness messages and they're not getting received, then we've got some things to fix on our end. So, but that's no different, right? We've always needed to check on and get those feedback loops. So, but I did see the easy button was, let's go back to email, and that's not the best path.
No, no, no. And I believe, as you said at the start there, there is some difference between a change manager and a project manager. And I've had a few people ask me what is the difference. or they have, other assumptions that maybe change is part of the project manager's role or it's part of PMO's role. But in essence, there is a part of, I guess, everyone's role to play in change. But to be a change practitioner, which is what you're talking about with change management per se, what is the main differences you would say, or main characteristics that separate project managers from change managers?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of like easy framing models that we can look at. We often at ProSci talk about the technical side of change versus the people side of the change. So the technical side of change is, what are we designing, developing, and delivering to address the problem or opportunity that exists? And that could be technology. Technology could be part of that, or it could just be process change or role change. I mean, there's a whole list of things that could be changing. So we talk about project management on the technical side of the change, the skills and resources to scope a major project into work streams and to put work breakdown structures and assigned roles and timelines and cost and budget and measurement and management of the technical side of the change. And on the change management side, a change practitioner's focus is how do we support, equip, and enable the people who are impacted by those changes? How do we engage them in the design of the solution, perhaps, right? So much of the resistance that comes in our organizations is if we think we have all the answers on the technical side, and the end user gives us their requirements, we write up the requirements document, they review it, they go yes, we build it, and they go no, that's not it. So of course, iterative or small chunk delivery of projects through agile methods has helped with that because you have check-ins and feedback along the way. But the change practitioner is focused on the people side of the change and how do we engage them? How do we drive adoption? How do we improve usage so that our success is achieved? Because a technical solution without adoption it just doesn't have, we've wasted the money that went into doing that. And sometimes we're in a worse off place because now we've got issues with trust. We've got issues with, well, we've tried this before. I was working on a project with an organization that was trying to implement SharePoint for the third time. And, each of the first two failures, the first time, I think they really didn't know what they had their hands on, right? What the technology was and how it was, part of the integration of their Microsoft platform and, really what they were up to. And then they got a handle on the solution itself, and then they built it out on the technical side. And, everybody pushed back and said, I don't know why I'm doing this. This doesn't help me. I don't see why I need to put my information in this. It's so much easier to do it the way I've been doing it. I'm just going to keep working it around. So I got called in on the third time. And, we did a retrospective and looked back and figured out, what went wrong in the first two attempts. And it was the people side, right? They hadn't sat down and really thought about who's going to be impacted. How are they going to be impacted? How is this different than what they're doing today? What are we going to do to help them go through their change journeys? And I laughed because one of the leaders of the project said, can we just call it something different? And I'm like, no, we can't call it something different. Everybody's going to know this is the third attempt to try to get SharePoint set up inside of the organization for information management and compliance. So, at a certain point, you have to just come back and say, here's what we're going to do differently. And we just had to be very heavily communication, sponsor driven, what we were doing this time that was going to lend itself to a successful project outcome, which we did achieve. So, the change practitioner is really, thinking and way beyond go live. Adoption happens after go live. Our story of sustainment and benefits realization is once people are fully adopting, using, and proficiently able to do what they're being asked to do. And again, it could be technical, it could be process, it could be cultural, it could be values-based, it could be critical behaviors in the adoption of other technologies. We were talking about AI, earlier, and it could be that critical behavior of how do I behave now that I have an AI agent to help segment some of the work. Well, you're on the human-centric aspects of your job role, and this tool now can help us, or this aid, however we want to describe it, can slice off some of those things that are more the repetitive tasks, research-based tasks, agent-type tasks. So just going through an AI adoption is a huge change management challenge. It's not just the technology, it's
Yeah.
how are people impacted and how are we going to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this, I mean, the bigger the change I've been on, um, the less likely they're going to hire, for some reason, just in my part of the world, hire a change manager because it's already expensive. And that sounds very counterintuitive. So there was a big project that I was on. It was a big ERP transformation. I won't name which one. And they always are quite tricky because there's a lot of really sensitive information. Financial data has to come in. So then you've got the finance team very, very anxious because they're very risk averse. Then you have the project team ready to deliver. Then you have the stakeholders on either side of that that are going to use the tool once it's into that go live position. And then someone says, probably the project manager, says, hey, shouldn't we get some change managers on this? And they're like, no, I think we've got enough people to manage this ourselves. And we've got the stakeholders who are the end users. They should really be the change managers. Um, what do you do in that situation? Because this is very common in the areas that I work in.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. An ERP system is, quite complex. Some of the CRM solutions or ERP solutions have so much complexity built into them. And the question you have to ask is, what is the adoption story? And if we don't do change management, what are the risks to the organization? And, again, from a data perspective, ProSci has, what we call a key question. We ask people in a particular project or change initiative, and it could be small, large, disruptive, incremental, doesn't really matter. What percentage of the benefits of this particular project or change depend on people changing how they do their work? And, if you look at the distinction, let me give you just two, end of spectrum. If your organization implements, and this is a far away from ERP, but I promise I'm coming back. If your organization implements automated lighting systems in your conference rooms, so as soon as you walk in the room, the lights come on after a certain amount of downtime, unless you're waving your hands when they go out, the organization realizes the benefits without people having to do anything differently. I walk in the room, the lights come on, I leave the room, in a certain amount of time, the lights go off. Versus if somebody is implementing a full set of recycle and composting sorts inside of the cafe at the headquarters, right, where people have to walk over and actually sort their things, their trash, into the various categories. That particular change is 100% adoption dependent. So you don't get the benefits
Mm.
unless people do what you're asking them to do. So now we've got 0 to 100%. So if you look like at an ERP system, some of the changes are happening behind the scenes. So some of those are remapping our data sets or our databases or how our connected information between our finance systems and other systems of the organization. So some of those benefits just naturally occur by the installation. So if you think of that, then what is the percentage that's people dependent? And across all changes, ProSci's data says that 70% of benefits are people dependent. And then the correlate question is how much are we investing to realize that 70%? And the average response is 3% of our project budget. So there's a problem there. So if 70% of our benefits come from people changing the way they do their work, and we're only investing 3% of our project funding into that to realize that 70%, we've got a risk factor. So I invite people to think about it from a risk mitigation perspective. And of course, rework, relaunch, rethink, redo. I mean, how many times organizations like the one I described, it wasn't ERP, but it was a technical solution, was on the third try, right? They had to scrap 2 previous attempts because they weren't going to go live with any semblance of a success story. So it's more the what if we don't? What happens if we don't do that? And are we willing
Mm.
to invest some to realize much more? And that's the story. And the ROI of change management is quite significant.
So if we were doing this podcast 25 years ago, let's say, what would we be talking about that we probably aren't talking about now because, we're still talking about people, we're talking about change, we're talking about really emphasizing how changes impact people's lives. So what have been the main differences in the last 25 years, say? Is it still all about people and we're still not quite
Yeah.
doing it right, or is it like what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, I think we get partially there. The conversations around stakeholders and stakeholder impact, you have a stakeholder conversation as a project manager, you have a stakeholder conversation as a change manager. So we're looking at the same groups of people who are receiving the changes that are being implemented. I'd say what's happened in the last 25 years is just putting more structure around this discipline. And, it's one of those, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see the people side of change, you can't unsee it. When I ask, senior leaders in organizations to think of a change in their organization that was particularly successful and one that was particularly not successful. I don't like to say unsuccessful, but didn't go as well as hoped or anticipated. And you try to look for the pattern spotting about what's the line of difference between the two. And oftentimes it's the people side, right? How we focused or didn't focus on the people side. So I think a lot of it has to do with the maturity of the discipline, putting more formality around it. If you go back and do early studies of change management, they were more social, psychological types of conversations. But then as the change management discipline in the late 70s and early 80s started formalizing, then you get into the late 1990s when Jeff Hyatt, who's ProSci's founder, really spent time. He spent 4 years looking at 700 different patterns of change across organizations and trying to figure out what's different. So I think it's putting models, it's putting frameworks, it's putting actionable methodologies in practice that people can be guided through. Not so much all of the actions, but at least the questions. There's a set of questions that guide this body of work, and the answers might be quite different depending on who you're asking those questions of. So I'd say, Martin, more than anything, it's just the maturation, the thinking about this as, yeah, I think there's something there. And early on, everybody said, well, it's just communication and training. If we just communicate and train, that's change management. And what we know is there are other layers to the discipline that are all focused on that individual sitting at their desk, just trying to do their work and not understanding how to act the way they're being asked to act, or to use the tools, or to activate the process, or to answer the queries that are coming in from customers because the organization has decided they're going to do it differently and they don't know what different means, and they don't know what different means to them. So personalizing it, and that was Jeff Hyatt's big, oh gosh, I would say finding in all of that work that he did, is that there can be lots of busyness around change management, the communication and the training and the engagement of leaders and things that happen. But it's really, how do we manage change at the individual level? Because organizational change is the composite of all those individual changes. So if 50,000 people are impacted by a change, how does each one of those people go through their own change journey so the organization realizes the benefits? And Jeff formalized that through the ADKAR model, which is, the individual change model that sits at the middle of almost everything we do at ProSci.
So I think the main takeaway from that is there's a lot more maturity, a lot more process, procedures now than there was. So
And
look,
it's all the research,
yeah,
the research on what works and what doesn't. Anybody who's done gosh, we've been doing this for a long time. What's really working? When you get to the essence of, what's really working and you formalize it, you make it repeatable, you can model it, you can repeat it, and you can scale it. That's where we are. Change management can be modeled at the individual level, integrated with the org change, and then scaled. And that's what organizations need.
so looking forward, then we'll hopefully have some more maturation in the field, some more research, some more data to tell us um, what works, what doesn't work so well. How do you see technology, particularly things like AI and machine learning, how do you see that impacting where we'll be in, say, 10 years' time?
Yeah, there's two sides to it. I think, on the technical side, we're all operating at, breakneck speed around the changes to the technology. I still to this day I remember, gosh, when would that have been? December of 2022, maybe. When did ChatGPT initially have its like early release? Our product manager sent me a message and said, "Look what I just did." And he was, submitting a query through ChatGPT and showing me the response. And it was like early when you couldn't get into the tool and everybody was waiting in queues to be able to get access. And I felt like I had a moment where I said, I feel like I've just seen the landing on the moon and the Berlin Wall come down on one day, right? This is so impactful and dramatic. And we've all seen what's happened just even since those early days. So the technology will continue to advance, and then it becomes, how do we use it? What does it do with us and for us? And now we're back to a change management challenge. How do we adopt these new capabilities that are available to us? And how do we create an on-ramp for the continuous improvement that's going to happen? There's not going to be a snapshot in time where it's done. It's like, okay, we're done now. AI's done. Here you go.
Mhm.
So how do we set our organizations up to continuously receive the advancements? So again, we're back to, what is it? What are we going to do with it? How's it change what we're doing today? So the changes in the technology, who's to say, where that's heading? I think, pattern spotters and futurists have a good idea of what might happen based on what's already happened. But for organizations who are just trying to figure out, how do I, because my competitors are, so how do I think about how to bring this into my organization and deploy it effectively? We're back to another adoption story. So change management is the discipline and the thinking for whether it's an ERP, a CRM, an AI, or any other alphabet we want to put into the mix of a change.
Val, if I could ask your opinion of that same question, you spent most of this week trying to convince people about how they need to adapt. Um, how do you see that impacting change management in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Karen on the sense that, AI will never be done. It'll never be the end state. Technology is always reinventing itself. And so it's kind of be interesting how it's going to integrate with humans' capability. And I mentioned something this week, Karen, about what if the workforce that you're working with in your organization isn't all human? Some of it's human and some of it's non-human in terms of capability. And it poses some interesting questions around, what do you do with a 24-hour workforce that doesn't get sick and doesn't need to eat and doesn't need to have a break? And then how do you balance that off with elevated roles for humans? And I argued the point that we'd probably get more into the creative space, which may actually lean into change management a bit more than perhaps project managers have had time for in the past, or leaders have had time for in the past. Um, but where the relationship is with change, I'm not sure. I think we're still going to need someone to guide us, Martin. We're still going to need someone. It's almost a reassurance hand, someone we trust. It's a critical friend there to say, it's okay, this is the way we're going. Someone to hold the torch and light the cave along the way, in front of us. Um, it just depends, and we're all speculating at the moment because we don't know. But I do think there is some type of role there, Karen and Martin, that I think would be really interesting. But you've got a follow up question, Martin. I can
No,
already
no,
tell.
no. I was just going to press you because you said you kind of agree with what Karen said. What was it you didn't agree with?
Well, it's just the uncertainty of placing too much faith in machines and technology. I'm a big advocate for tech, love tech, and if tech could do everything, I think Karen, you talked about having a robot in the house and calling it Rosie. I mean, if you've ever watched The Jetsons, that was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. So I think the wishful thinking of having a robot do everything is there, and the aspiration's certainly there, and the pace is there. But I don't want to lose some of the human fundamentals of working with people, and I think change management, as you mentioned it, Karen, is one of those fundamentals that I hopefully doesn't get replaced that easily.
Yeah, I mean,
And
how do you
yeah,
replace this? The human to human and the innovation and the thinking that occurs. And When I said I called myself an end user advocate because I didn't know what else I was, I knew what I cared about. I just didn't know it had a discipline and a structure. It's because I saw people in their work environments just overwhelmed, stressed out, taking all of the stresses of work home with them that has then those ripple effects into our personal relationships and our health and our well-being. And if the organization that they worked for had just spent more time thinking about that change process and how to help people get through it naturally, again, there's a model behind all of that. There's steps, there's outcomes, there's measurables, there's activities that drive that. And sure, we can teach an AI engine to do that, and I use it all of the time. I was on a
Yeah.
podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the host sent me a question in advance, and I'm like, that's a really interesting. I wonder what ProSci's corpus of knowledge on this particular, the discipline, because we have an AI engine that's taught through our, over 25 years of change management research. So I went to Kaya and I typed in the answer, and I got, 7 bullet points back. And I'm like, well, Kaya, that was very insightful. Thank you very much. And then I processed through those. That was like a first draft in seconds, right? By the time I finished executing the query, pushing enter, the
Mm.
responses coming up. And I had a first draft that I could go and reflect on and say, does what that output, right? It's just taught to learn off of, the body of content that it's received. Does that resonate with what I know to be true? Does that resonate with, my years of experience or the intuition that I've built in this discipline? How would I communicate that concept to somebody who's not in this discipline? That's not something, I could say, oh, Kaya, give me a plain language question for that particular body of content. And, that's one of the things ProSci focuses on is plain language. And a question would come back. So to me, it was like I had a fast first draft. And then I could say, now let me reflect my knowledge and expertise on top of that. So, maybe that's an application.
Mm.
But I do think there's a lot of role segmentation that's going to occur. This part of my role, like if I look at all the things I do every day, all day, over a week, a month, a year, how much of that is human centric versus how much of it is body of knowledge centric, that a fast first draft or an aid in that could be quite helpful, then I can do more of this, right? So I might have 1.5x more time to do this piece that's the human centric piece versus the time that I could allocate off to a tool to help me with that work. So I think we're all going to learn on that, and it's going to be different. Think of our university students who, I need to write a paper, and boy, it'd sure be easy to say, give me a 10,000 word paper on topic X
Oh yeah.
in my voice, right? Leveraging
Yeah.
these resources in my voice. So it's going to be interesting, but we've had interesting challenges in front of us always, and it's just the next, and there'll be a next after the next, and hopefully the common factor is there's just the people that are sitting there wherever they are, however they're engaging, trying to contribute and add value to their organizations and to deliver the best possible outcomes, and then to go home feeling like my company supports me through change. And that's
Mm.
again that's how we should treat our people.
Yeah, I agree, and we will definitely dive into Kaya in a second. You mentioned some research, and maybe this is a Martin question, but I'll fire it at Karen around. Do we have stats on projects that where we know where projects have gone wrong because they didn't have change managers, and we've seen projects where they did have change managers and it's gone right. Like, what is the benefit of having a change manager from a quantitative perspective? Have we done any research around that yet?
ProSci has. I mean, that's one of the things
Okay.
that we study. So, I mean, Martin, I don't know if you've got any, thoughts that come in from your side. Yeah, we actually have a visual that we call the Swiss cheese future state, and you can probably guess why it's called the Swiss cheese future state. Imagine, organizations building out a strategy to implement a change, name a change. It could be a mergers and acquisition, it could be a technology, it could be process, whatever. And they've got this ideal future state where, the ROI is written around the future state. We don't say the ROI is 50% adoption. We say that the ROI is 100% adoption. So if we don't have everybody adopting fully or completely or proficiently, right, we've got a Swiss cheese future state. And what we see in those cases, there's definitely lower ROI because our benefit stories are not built around less than 100% adoption usually. Maybe we do some factoring for proficiency because sometimes there's a dip in productivity before people become proficient again. But we see, unachieved improvements. We see, adding to a history of failed change. And, when people have lots of evidence that their organization is not good at change, they hold on to it and they use that card when they need it. Because then with another change comes along and they say, we're really not very good at change. And the resistance, they start looking for those resistance flags and put them up the flagpole and go, I don't think this is the right technology. I don't think this is being implemented. I don't think I have the right knowledge, whatever the resistance flag that goes up the flagpole. So we've got data behind that. But, the story that comes back over and over again is, back to the success story. What are you trying to achieve? What are the organizational benefits? What are the project objectives? What is the reason for change? And, what are you willing to invest or risk not getting to full and complete adoption and use? But yeah, and people, the trust, I think trust is a big one too, is people, need to trust that their organizations are going to support them through change.
I had another idea as well, and this isn't fact-based, it's just opinion. So, by experience, that if the culture isn't ready, so if you have a poor culture in a company, any type of change, it could be a very small change or a big change, whatever it is so much more harder. And it's almost like, as you said, if the company doesn't, or the people in the company don't feel like they're being supported, and then you go and implement some more change, and maybe you've tried this before, and there isn't a lot of faith or trust in that culture, it's such a harder or more difficult job than it should be. And so part of this formula, when you're testing the change ecosystem, if you like, how much of culture factors into that, like pre-culture, pre-change culture? Do you do some analysis around that? Like, what's the view from ProSci and yourself?
Yeah, well, you obviously start in a hole, right? You got to dig yourself out of a hole to just get back to, ground zero if people don't believe that they're supported or there's a toxic culture in that way. And again, working with organizations in so many industries, I had one project that I was with a client, off and on for several months on a long-term project, and I came home one time and I looked at my husband and I'm like, how do these people get up every day? And of course, that was pre-COVID, so people were literally getting up every day, driving to a location in Houston, Texas, with the level of traffic that it has. And the culture was just so negative. People didn't know each other on their own teams. They didn't trust leadership. And we were trying to implement a change. So we had to bring the context of the change into our change management strategy, understanding the culture and the context with some difficult challenges. So we had to find key influencers, and we had to find, where were the trusted people to engage. But organizations need to organizations that build change capability decide to build change capability. They look at it as a differentiator. They look at it as a human resources support system. They look at it as a strategic component of their organizational success. So there's maturity levels in that. There's, a path to building change capability. And sometimes it's just, getting a few people trained and starting to build the language and the process. Then maybe establishing like a model project, a demonstration project. I love, creating bright spots, going back to, the Heath brothers and some of the work that they did. They introduced the concept of a bright spot. So why not pick a project in the organization, hopefully one that's visible enough, complex, but not too complex. I mean, there's some work to discern, a good place to build a bright spot, but to just do it right, just do it by the book. and to document what was done and to demonstrate that so that you've got that new story that's being told, and you can showcase it and say, this is what we're going to do in the continuation or in the future. And we've got to build capability. So we need people, we need resources, we need, the skills and capabilities that come alongside this discipline. But it's one of those, organizations have to decide, and it's going to come from the leadership teams that now you can build a demonstration project at the grassroots. And I've seen this too, where somebody says, well, my senior leaders, they just think of change management's everybody's job. Well, if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job, because then it's not a called out capability. But build a grassroots effort and then promote it. I had one client, we did an amazing demonstration project, and then we wrote up a white paper that got circulated internally to the organization, that then got picked up in the newsletter and got picked up by the KPIs on the dashboard of the senior leaders. We made sure we put the metrics on it. So to get it recognized, and then somebody's going to go, wait a minute, what did you do differently than what we usually do?
Nice. Well, I can't really top that. It's very, very, very profound there. Knocked me off my stride.
You stumped Martin. That's the first time I've ever heard Martin be stumped by someone on the show. Well done, Karen. Well done.
Thank you very much.
So I was going to go back to Val piqued my interest when we mentioned metrics and measurements, and obviously there's a few stats on how we measure the success or effectiveness of change projects. How do you see that evolving, and do you think we'll change some of the criteria for how we measure success in the future?
I do. I hope so. And again, it's, I sound like a broken record, and I admit that I sound like a broken record, but organizations change for a reason. There's a reason why they're doing what they're doing, and there's expectations for benefits as a result. And some of those are project level, and some of those are, the organization gains a particular benefit. So, what is the, and you can look at this from a benefits perspective, and there are people who study benefits realization. And if you look at the benefits realization story, benefits don't get derived from going live. Even if I push a project out on schedule, on budget, on time, I know we don't like, the constraining factors, they're just the trade-offs, right? I'd rather talk about them as trade-offs than constraints. So we trade off one thing for another thing, and we do our very best to optimize for an on time, on schedule, on budget delivery. But that's not when the adoption happens. That's when the change happens. So we need to extend our horizon for benefits realization from the moment of go live to the actualization of the benefits. And the optimization of that comes 1 month, 2 months, 10 months, 2 years after the instantiation of the change. And at ProSci, we talk about 3 different factors. So we talk about speed of adoption, right? How quickly are people coming up to speed? So you could have a speed of adoption metric. You can say, within 30 days, I want 90% of my people, in the system, and over the course of 6 months, right, this is going to happen. Then utilization, right? How well, how quickly, how well, and how many. So speed of adoption, utilization, and proficiency. So if people aren't proficient, right, and how do they know they're proficient or not? Somebody has to say, this is proficient. So you almost need a rubric that says you're using that new ERP system. If you're using that new ERP system fully to the way it's designed to deliver the benefits that we're intending, you're not doing your sidebar Excel spreadsheets anymore. You're not doing this whole set of workarounds because you haven't fully trusted that what you're going to get out of the system delivers what you need out of the system. Then, that's where we're going to sit. And that happens from go live. Then we start having our realization of benefits, right? The sustainment of the change and the realization of benefits. And so I think just getting more clarity around what is the timeline. But what happens on the project side, of course, my project team gets disbanded and reassigned almost immediately. And so I need to leave the nuggets behind, which could be the change practitioner or the change process, to continue on with the benefits realization to outcomes. And there's lots of gaps that are going to happen there, right? People aren't using it proficiently. So then what do? Who manages that? We need to have technical feedback to the technical team. Maybe a technical feature missed the mark. So is my technical team still available to receive the feedback that we've got an error or admission capability inside of the system or tool? So
Mm,
it's perspective, it's horizons, right? My horizon for success is full adoption, utilization, and proficiency, and measurement of benefits realization. Now, organizations aren't particularly good at declaring what the benefits are or measuring them. So if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing and what the goals and objectives are, and then we don't measure them, then it's hard to go back in any sense of accuracy on the test for ROI. And I think that's, more and more organizations, again, it's a discipline to be able to go
mm.
back and do that. But the change practitioner wants to know that were fully adopted before they cycle off. And then the ownership has been transferred to the receiving organization.
Do you think technology can help with that measurement? Because you kind of already answered my question there. What happened? You're going to be
Absolutely.
gone after the
Yeah,
change has happened.
absolutely. Yeah, and in an ideal world, those metrics come from the technology because, metrics management is very costly. Do I hire a person to just go collect the data? Yeah, no, I'd rather have a system say X number of people logged on. They were in this feature for this amount of time. They clicked on these capabilities. If they were there for less than 10 seconds, we know they didn't do what they were supposed to do because it takes longer than 10 seconds to go in and do the customer profile, or, I'm just making something up. But yeah, we can grab data metrics off and then you talk to the people, right? How are you doing? Are you fully feeling aware? You've got the knowledge. Do you now have the ability? And I always cycle back to AGCAR because sitting underneath of it is that individual change journey from awareness through desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So what we're doing is we're closing the K to A gap, knowledge to ability, to drive proficiency and outcomes. And that's a people-centric aspect of this work.
So, Karen, you
So
know how I was thinking about because project managers, they're more task oriented than people. People's part of the equation, but they have tools, not necessarily just methodologies. I mean, they have methodologies as well, which I know change management borrow as well, like Agile. But they also have things like critical path method to help deliver because it's driven by logic, right? And so some of that can be planned quite well. What's the equivalent to change management? Do they have like a change management as a service software provider? Is there a tool that helps kind of template and progress, I guess, the change process? Because a lot of the times when you talk about, as you said, it's quite costly to have a resource sit there and do metrics. And usually it's disparate data as well. Maybe it's more than one thing that's being implemented, especially if it's qualitative data that you're trying to receive, plus data from the systems that they're using. Um, is there a tool out there for change management or change transformation?
yeah, I mean, a tool is we can describe what is a tool. What we do have, right? We have models and methodology. We have bodies of knowledge that support why we might do one thing versus another thing given a certain context or condition, right? If I have a really effective sponsor inside of an organization, I'm going to tap them and activate them and get them off working right through a script that I provide that says, here's where I need you to be and what you need to say, and here's how you need to engage, right? If I go into an organization that does not have an active invisible sponsor, somebody who's difficult to get to or has no idea who I am or why I'm there, I'm going to do different things, but that doesn't negate the fact that the number one success factor for change and change initiatives is an active invisible sponsor. So again, I could have a tool that says, oh, if you have an active sponsor, here's where you can activate them quickly and effectively. If you don't have an active invisible sponsor, here's some of the things that you can do to get them more engaged or to build a coalition or, come up with another solution other than, a sponsor you can't get access to. So I think that what you need to do doesn't change, how you do it does. So tools might be able to give me the guidance of, here's the questions you need to ask, here's the steps you need to take, here's the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Now, as a professional who has discernment and knowledge and understanding in relationships, right, building those relationships, I don't earn, I earn myself into the CEO's office to have a conversation about being a sponsor of a high level change. That's something that is outside of a tool. But we do have methodology, we have process, we have tools, we have data. I mean, all of those things support the execution. And then I contextualize them based on the change and based on the organization and many other factors.
There we go. Shout out to Tim Creasy. Let's build a change management platform. We'll give you some ideas and we can whiteboard. I love the idea that all the things that you're talking about are malleable and they can scale up and down. One of the things that I think we struggle with on the non-change management side, which is part of the ADKAR principle, right, is awareness. But it's actually awareness of the values and the skills of change management. How does one get access to the resources? Obviously, there's websites and books, but how do they become, as you said, a bit more understanding of the measures? You mentioned proficiency and those kinds of things, which would be really useful for a project manager to know, or a sponsor or a leader in a project. What are your kind of go-to resources?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I did an awful lot of self-study before I determined ProSci was my partner, and then I ended up working for ProSci. I called Tim and said, the organization I've been working for is getting sold, and he's like, "Yep, you're welcome to join me on my team." So you can go to ProSci.com. As an organization, we are a knowledge transfer company. That's part of our DNA. Our mission and vision is to help individuals and organizations build their own change capability. So there's, so much research and, hundreds of hours of webinars and content that you can just consume and learn. And I did that as well as certainly the formalized training programs that are available. And I have a program that I delivered yesterday. It's a ProSci program called Delivering Project Results. We call it DPR. Delivering project results is not training on change management. It's training on the integration of project management and change management. So we talk about the scope and the milestones and the timing and the integrations and the language. And so much of this is creating a common language that everybody can sit and share. Now, of course, you get exposed to diagnostics. We have diagnostics and tools. I know Tim talked to you about the PCT, the triangle, right? The project change triangle. All of those diagnostics and tools are useful and usable. And what they do is they help me more, and any change practitioner, be more effective. So I would say take the self-learning path and, just, dive in and, see what this discipline is all about. There's so much resource available to go. One of my areas of interest is extending change management into change portfolio management, and how we look at a portfolio of change and heat maps and the trade-offs that exist in timing, right? If the finance department has a go live in November, and then somebody else has got another change coming along that has a similar impact, what do we do with the heat maps? So there's a whole set of conversations we can have on a different day about change portfolio management, right? And the people side of portfolio management. But again, it's that integration of knowing what's changing and how that process inside of organizations delivers the changes. And then how do we deliver the people to the changes? And so when go live comes, that event is equal to people are ready. And the more we focus on readiness versus resistance, the faster we can land those changes, deliver the benefits, and continue on with the next set of changes. So it's an engine. It's like an engine builder. If you ever play card games or board games that have an engine builder inside of them, right? Once you tap the engine produces. And building change capability is an engine builder for change success.
That's fantastic. Well, look, because you are one of our new guests, we have an age-old tradition now for going on 5 years now, Martin.
Ready?
It's a quick fire, rapid response system, not an engine. but Martin's going to take over and offer you a very quick pulse survey. So go, Martin, over to you.
All right.
Let's make a start. So number one, what's the biggest misconception about change management?
That it's everybody's job and nobody's job, right? It's a structured and measured discipline.
Definitely. Number two, are leaders born or made?
Leaders are inclined to be made with tapping the mindset and tool sets that they need to be effective.
Nice. What would be your book recommendation to our listeners?
Am I allowed to say my own?
Apart from your own. Oh, God.
Yeah, I just had the opportunity to write an update for the AdCar book. So ProSci has a new AdCar book that I had the privilege, honor to write. Right now I'm reading books that are more focused on mindset shifts, how we help people go through those mindset shifts. I was just reading a fascinating article on simplicity on the other side of complexity. Because so much of what we're doing today is quite complex. There's a quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes about, he wouldn't give a fig for anything on this side of complexity, but he'd give his life for something on the other side of complexity, which is once you find your way through something that's quite complex and you can now communicate effectively, you have models and tools, you've discerned the essence of something. So, how do we communicate effectively? How do we discern through the complexity to help people adapt more quickly and to support them? So that's kind of where my mind is lately, is mindset shifts.
Nice. Will a change manager still be required in 10 years' time?
Yes. Because the people are the people, and we still need the human-to-human interface and intervention. I hope. I just, the value of the work, and you mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate about this industry because I love, it's the peopleiest people that you find in this discipline. I laugh because, coming from an IT background, when you go to an IT conference, they're not always the peopleiest people, but when you go to a change management conference, they are the peopleiest people, right? You find the people who genuinely want to make those human-to-human connections and care deeply about people going through the changes that their organizations are putting them on, right? The journey is the organization journey. I'm along for the ride. I can always jump off, right? I can exit an organization because I don't want to be along for the ride, but boy, let's keep our good people. Let's train them, teach them, support them. And I sure hope change management and the people side of change is still activated human to human.
Couldn't agree more. Fantastic.
Fantastic.
And finally, not quite yet, Val, what was your last ChatGPT question?
My last ChatGPT question, gosh, I asked a question about the new DOGE Department of Government Efficiency, because I think that there's, my interest is from the people side. If that new function, capability department, whatever we want to declare that it might be, is going to go out and start hitting all of these agencies and looking for efficiencies and looking for the cost savings, which of course we know naturally occur. What about the people? So I was actually thinking about whether or not there's a people change management aspect that can be incorporated in that. So that was my last ChatGPT, was tell me more about what Elon and Vivek are up to.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great pod. Listen, we went through an hour so quickly, Karen, and just like Tim Chrissy, we're going to have you back for more. I want to hear more about we didn't get into AI either, Martin, which we usually do. But Karen, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say, again, learn, be curious about this, look, observe inside of your organization. How are things going? How are people doing? And you may find that they're not doing so great, and there are things that we can do to support them. And I think it's valuable work.
Great, thanks, Karen. Martin, anything from you, mate?
No, just thanks a lot for your time. That's some really fascinating insights into the change management practice. So, how about you, Val? What were your main takeaways?
best part was when you got stumped and had run out of questions for our guest. But look, folks, we've got to leave you there. If you like what you hear, you know where to find us. Keep liking and pay it forward. From me and Martin and Karen, it's bye for now.